what's called best military advice. I'm not aware of a formal request to the Taliban one way or the other on staying past the 31st. I am very familiar with the advice that we provided on the 25th.
Before the fall of Kabul, did we actually have formal Taliban agreement upon an August 31st departure date?
I'm not sure what you mean by formal, but I think that's a
Had
policy.
there ever been a point where the United States went to the Taliban saying that we are planning to leave on August 31st?
Sure.
And I'm talking about prior to the fall of Kabul.
Yeah, I think from a policy perspective, Zal Khalilzad could give you the detailed information on that. I do believe the Taliban knew that we were departing on the 31st. We announced it.
But you weren't aware of it?
I'm not aware of a formal agreement, per se, but I think Zal Khalilzad could give you better definition of that.
General McKenzie, I want to turn back to you then, because you were saying that you talked with the Taliban on August 15th. Did you use August 31st as a date to end the operations? Was there a date set at all in your discussions with them?
I did not use a specific date when I talked to them.
So no date was set on August 15th?
I did not convey a specific date as part of my conversation.
I wanted to switch gears one more time here. Secretary Austin, moving forward, when we're looking at the fundamental viability of the over-the-horizon effort, is the airspace over Afghanistan currently considered sovereign airspace? And I guess I'll frame it in a slightly different way. Is it currently legal for the United States to conduct ISR sorties and airstrikes in Afghanistan?
And it looks like they're getting ready to do it again.
Yes.
Under what authority is that legal?
Well, same authorities we were using
that
before.
Are killing the common
and that would be under the Security and Defense Cooperation Agreement of 2014, is that correct?
Like these Democrats not listening to our voices.
No, I think what we're prosecuting now is are the authorities that were referred to by General McKenzie earlier, and he mentioned that he would have to take that into a classified setting.
All green.
Okay, well, I'll certainly follow with you that way. General McKenzie, something I wanted to follow up with you on. Yesterday in your hearing in front of the Senate, you made a comment when asked about the war on terror, and you said that the war on terror is not over. But then you also went on and said that the war in Afghanistan is not over. So I just wanted a clarification from you. In your opinion, is the war in Afghanistan over?
I got full green down here.
I believe the war in Afghanistan is not over. I believe we are no longer a party to that war, but that doesn't mean that ISIS and the Taliban aren't going to engage in a furious fight this fall that may result in the ISIS being crushed, or it may result in ISIS
I see. So when you're saying that, you're referring that you believe that there's a civil war in Afghanistan, but in terms of the United States war against Afghanistan, you would say that is over.
We have no forces in Afghanistan. Our only interest in Afghanistan is looking for ISIS killed and allocated targets.
Has expired.
Thank you, Chairman.
Gates is recognized.
It's open.
February 26, 2020, House Armed Services Committee, General Mark Milley.
Disabled, as you see
we know we're not going to defeat the Taliban militarily, and they're not going to defeat the government of Afghanistan militarily. You really blew that call, didn't you, General?
This is the one I've been waiting on.
I believe that was a issue of strategic stalemate, and that if we had remained in Afghanistan with the advisory levels of effort, then the government of Afghanistan.
Well, that's an interesting answer to a question. It's just not one I asked. You spent more time with Bob Woodward on this book than you spent analyzing the very likely prospect that the Afghanistan government was going to fall immediately to the Taliban, didn't you?
Not even close, Congressman.
Oh, really? Because you said right after Kabul fell that no one could have anticipated the immediate fall of the Ghani government. When did you become aware that Joe Biden tried to get Ghani to lie about the conditions in Afghanistan? He did that in July. Did you know that right away?
I'm not aware of what President Biden...
You're not aware of the phone call that Biden had with Ghani where he said, whether it is true or not, we want you to go out there and paint a rosy picture of what's going on in Afghanistan. You're the chief military advisor to the president. You said that the Taliban was not going to defeat the government of Afghanistan militarily, which, by the way, they cut through them like a hot knife through butter. And then the president tries to get Ghani to lie. When did you become aware of that attempt?
Well, there's two things there, Congressman, if I may. One is what I said was the situation was stalemate, and if we kept advisors with there, the government of Afghanistan and the Army would have still been there. That's what I said. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. But
it seems wrong now with
the
Taliban in
we
control.
withdrew all the
Secretary Austin, are you capable of assessing whether another has the will to fight.
Don't forget to use the comments.
No, we're
Share
not,
the video.
and that's the point that the chairman made earlier. So.
That's just like an incredibly disappointing thing for the Secretary of Defense to simply say, I can't assess whether someone has the will to fight. But it is consistent with your record. I mean, during the Obama administration, I think they gave you about $48 million to go train up some folks in Syria to go take on the Assad government. And I think your testimony was that only 4 or 5 survived first contact with the enemy. So what confidence should this committee have in you, or should the country have in you, when you've now confessed to us, and whether it's the swing and a miss in Afghanistan that General Milley talked to the Senate about yesterday, total failure, or whether it was your failures in Syria, you don't seem capable to look at a fighting force and determine whether or not they have the will.
Well,
Is that an embarrassing?
You recall, Congressman, that the end result was the SDF that we stood up that was very, very instrumental in turning the tide of battle up in Syria.
Oh, yeah.
What does that have to
turned
do?
it so much. You've got Assad in power in Syria.
Yeah.
You've got the Taliban in power in Afghanistan. I mean, where have you been?
The focus was ISIS.
Man, we
Congressman.
took out ISIS
And
with Trump.
those forces had significant effect on the ISIS network.
It just seems like you're chronically bad at this. And you have admitted that, I guess, which is to your credit. But, you know, when people in the military, like Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller, stand up and demand accountability, when they say that you all screwed up, when they point out that General Milley's statement that that the government of Afghanistan is not going to get defeated by the Taliban, well, he ends up in the brig. And you all end up in front of us, and your former employer, Raytheon, ends up with a lot of money, and we have poured cash and blood and credibility into a Ghani government that was a mirage. It fell immediately. And while the guy sitting next to you was off, you know, talking to Phil Rucker and was off doing his thing with Bob Woodward,
You guys
were
are
buying
giving
into
up
the big lie. The big lie that this was ever going to be successful and that we could ever rely on the Afghanistan government for anything at all. You know, General Milley, you kind of gave up the game earlier when you said you wanted to address elements of your personal conduct that were in question. We're not questioning your personal conduct. We're questioning in your official capacity going and undermining the chain of command, which is obviously what you did. You've created this whole chain
Did not
of
undermine the chain of
narrative.
command in
Yeah,
any
you
manner,
did.
shape, or form.
You absolutely did. And
Did not.
well, you know what? You said yesterday that you weren't going to resign when senators asked you this question. And I believe that you guys probably won't resign. You seem to be very happy failing up over there. But if we didn't have a president that was so addled, you all would be fired. Because that is what you deserve. You have perception is and how people think about you in insider Washington books than you care about winning,
Gentleman's
which this
time
group
has
seems incapable
expired.
of doing.
Ms. Houlihan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And gentlemen, I apologize for the behavior of my colleague.
Miss
I'm
Houlihan,
deeply,
get on
deeply
your
appreciative
knees
of your
and
service
suck his
and of
cock.
the decades of experience that you all bring
Suck
to
on
this
it good, girl,
conversation.
because
Thank you so much
mean
for
it.
the opportunity to ask
Oh, you
important
ugly.
questions of you, questions that ought to be asked of you in the spirit of our
Oh, there it
responsibility of
is.
oversight rather than provocation.
Currently
So I just have a
slammed the
couple
video.
of questions of clarification from this testimony that's happened so far, and the first one is for you, General McKenzie. You mentioned something about, in your opening remarks, about you having looked at different branches to account for the complete collapse of
All they're doing is
the
pictures
government
right now.
and the Afghan military.
Yeah,
And that's
I
the
tell
first
you,
time,
it's an
frankly, that I've
amazing
heard
thing
that
when you get a
scenario being
watch
articulated out loud. Most of the
how your
testimony that
screen
I've
is
heard prior to
slammed
this has been we could have
by
never
the
foreseen
YouTubes.
that. So
Man,
as
I
somebody who's
tell
a
ya.
decision, the Taliban, we discussed a lot of different timelines over the course of the last few months. Has it been inevitable for 5 or 10 years? How long have you been relaying that information or that concern possibly to any of our senior leaders or senior administration? If you could share that with us as well.
Ma'am, so I'll start. I think it actually, from the relatively short-term perspective, I think the Doha Agreement and the signing of the Doha Agreement had a really pernicious effect on the government of Afghanistan and on its military. Psychological more than anything else, but we set a date certain for when we were going to leave and when they could expect all assistance to end. So for the first time, there was something out there in front of them. Now, I think that's an important thing. The other point would be, it's been my position and my judgment that if we went below an advisory level of 2,500, I believe that the government of Afghanistan would likely collapse and that the military would follow. And one might go before the other, but I believe that was going to be the inevitable result of drawing down to zero, and I've expressed that opinion in writing for quite a while. Now, so taking a look at that, that was sort of my best judgment on that. I believe that, so going below 2,500, I think, was the other sort of nail in the coffin, if you will, that allowed that the Afghan government, that led to conditions where, first of all, we could no longer see what was happening to the force because our advisors were no longer down there with those units. So let me give you an example. If we shipped a box of mortar rounds into Afghanistan, we would sign it over on the ramp at H-Kaya, and the Afghans would truck it away. There would be nobody below that level to help them disperse it, to see if it went to the bazaar or if it went down to the unit that needed mortar rounds.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Secretary Austin, it looked like you had something to contribute as well.
I certainly agree with comments that General McKenzie has made. I would just add to that that as a part of that agreement, we agreed to cease conducting air operations against the Taliban. So the Taliban got stronger. They increased their offensive operations against the Afghan security forces. And the Afghans were losing a lot of people on a weekly basis. In addition to that, we caused them to release 5,000 prisoners, and those prisoners, many of those prisoners went back to fill the ranks of the Taliban. So they got a lot stronger. They continued their attacks. We got smaller. And so I agree with General McKenzie. That's when you could begin to see things really begin to head in a different direction.
So with the last 4 seconds, I very much appreciate your time, and very intriguing that it seems like the Doha agreement might have been a pivotal point. And thank you. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Bacon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, you said today that you saw this as a strategic failure. As a 30-year veteran and someone who's been deployed 4 times myself, and I haven't served as long as the three of you, but it breaks our heart. And I think most veterans feel heartbroken knowing that the blood and the treasure spilt ended up in a strategic failure. I think we're enraged by it. Then have the president come out and say that this was a success and he had no regrets. That does not break our heart. That makes us mad as hell that he would say it that way. So I want to say that up front. Secondly, the fact that President Biden on ABC said that no one that he can recall advised him to keep a force of about 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. It's not true. We heard yesterday, we've heard today, that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the CENTCOM commander advised differently. I have no other view to see this as a lie, a falsehood from our president. That makes us mad as hell too. Thirdly, I think it's important to point out that this committee, for well over a year, cautioned both presidents against a premature withdrawal from Afghanistan. In fact, Republican and Democratic members of both the House and Senate were so concerned at the risk of a calendar-based withdrawal that we passed a law to prevent it. In fact, the chairman of this committee voted for it when it restricted President Trump. Section 1215 of the 2021 NDA prohibited any president, regardless of political party, from drawing down below 2,500 troops until the Secretary of Defense, in consultation with the Secretary of State and the DNI, provided Congress a detailed plan explaining how the U.S. would continue to conduct counterterror operations in Afghanistan following U.S. withdrawal. How would the U.S. conduct an orderly transition of security functions to the Afghan military? And how would the U.S. protect Americans who remained in country? And how would the U.S. coordinate any such withdrawal with our NATO allies? In short, every single failure that we are now witnessing, Congress warned against in writing and in law over a year ago. But after taking office, President Biden, I'm referring to, we wrote to the Biden administration reminding them that it was not permitted to go below 2,500 until it provided assurances to Congress that our vital interests could be secured. Despite clear congressional intent, backed by statute, this did not happen. The day after taking office, the newly confirmed Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Colin Powell, wrote to the members of this committee essentially stating that President Biden was smarter than Congress, was confident he had all the angles covered, and believed it was not in the national interest to provide Congress with the assurances required in Section 1215. And Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter this letter into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Okay, my first question here, General McKenzie, I think one of the reasons that the Afghan forces crumbled much quicker than we ever assessed, was that we pulled most of our air cover.